Okay, since the AP Lang exam for me is tomorrow, let's go over some strategies that I've created for the synthesis essay. So, the test goes somewhat like this. You have 60 minutes for multiple choice, then you'll have a 10-minute break, and then you have 135 minutes to do a timed essay block, right? And so what you should do is you should set out that time in the way that I'm going to tell you. And so I believe that you should spend 55 minutes working on your synthesis essay, 40 minutes on your rhetorical analysis essay, and 40 minutes on your argument essay. So in the description below, I have left a link for you to the document that I have here, which is the synthesis essay strategies. So the first thing that you'll see is the criteria for scoring an 8. I know many of you are not really shooting for an 8. You might be shooting for a 6 instead, which is fine, but I gave you the criteria for an 8 so you know what you should try to go for. I know many of you aren't expecting to get an 8, but you might as well attempt to go for it. And I believe that the strategies that I'm going to go over will help you in your path to getting a higher score on the AP Lang synthesis essay. So let's go over the criteria for scoring an 8. And I'm going to read this directly. Essays earning a score of 8, meaning that essays that have received an 8, effectively address the prompt, productively and accurately. They develop their position by effectively synthesizing at least 3 of the sources. The evidence and explanations appropriately and convincingly support the student's position. The prose demonstrates a consistent ability to control a wide range of the elements of effective writing, but is not necessarily flawless. Now, if it is flawless, then you might get a 9, but if it's not exactly flawless, you might get an 8 or you might get a 9. When it says flawless, it means you might have a few grammatical errors, maybe a few detractory errors, but not enough to destroy your argument. Okay? And for the purposes of scoring, synthesis means using sources to develop a position and citing them accurately. And this is directly from the College Board. So what I say is, in synthesis, you should focus on using the sources to qualify your argument. It is recommended that you work on this essay for the first 55 minutes of the essay period, which is 135 minutes long. This document will be a guideline of strategies that you can use to get a higher score on your AP Lang synthesis essay. So the first strategy is read the prompt. Okay? Read the entire prompt carefully and adequately for around 3 minutes. It is important that you understand the context of the essay and what you will be arguing. The format of the prompt is as follows: context, argument, and then requirements. So the context is information about the topic of the argument that will be useful for developing your understanding of the documents and their content. The following is the sample context for the essay that we will write together. And when I say write together, I mean we're going to develop some sort of position on it instead of actually writing it. Because it's best if before the exam you don't do practice essays. Instead, we just review strategies and multiple stratagem that you should use during the exam. Also, make sure to take a lot of nice relaxing breaks while studying if you are going to cram last minute, and get lots of sleep and eat well. Okay, so here's our context. Since human civilization first came into fruition, the development of some sort of belief system to explain the natural world and maintain order evolved along with it. This system is known in modern colloquial terms as religion. In the past, religion and science were intertwined and indifferentiable. Recently, many nations have removed teaching the history of religion from the school curriculum. Using this context, we can determine that the topic of the discussion will be about the removal of religion from the schools. Now let's take a look at the argument, which will usually ask you to either support or refute the topic. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Then synthesize material from at least 3 of the sources and incorporate it into a coherent, well-developed essay that defends, challenges, or qualifies the notion that teaching religion in school is productive and beneficial. The requirements are self-explanatory. No inference or extra understanding is needed to understand what the requirements are asking you to do. There's not some trick to it. The College Board just means if they give you a requirement, you have to do it and follow that requirement to the exact wording that they say. So if they say support the argument, they mean back up the argument with facts and data from the sources. That's exactly what they mean, so you're going to do exactly what they said. That's what the requirements are. The next strategy is read the sources. Read the 6 sources readily. Take about 12 minutes to do so. This means you should spend about 2 minutes on each source since there are 6 sources. Make sure to read the introductory information about the source, which tells you data such as the author and the publishing date. In the document, you will see an example of a source that you can use. I will not read it because you can just look at it yourself, and it's a lot easier for you to just read it off of the paper instead of me reciting it for you, because then you won't actually learn that way. Unless you're an auditory learner, which I doubt will much affect how you process the information, and I still believe that reading it will be the best gauge of understanding what it's about. So when you're reading the document, you should ask yourself a few questions. What do you think are the key points of the document? How does the document support or challenge the topic of the prompt? How could you use this to strengthen your argument? Those are the questions you should ask yourself when looking over the document, as I had said before. It is important that you ask yourself all these questions, and don't exactly read like to the T, don't read completely thoroughly. Just read as much as you can to get an idea about what the source is talking about, whether it challenges or refutes the topic, and answer a couple of those questions that I just went over. And then the next one is choose your argument. Using the documents, decide if it would be easier to either support or refute the topic of the prompt. Don't choose the side that you think is correct. It does not matter what your opinion is. Now, it might be easier to prove something that you believe in, but you have to use the sources, and if most of the sources refute what your belief is, then you are weakening your argument. You should go with what the documents say to create the strongest possible argument. Then figure out what you will use as evidence through synthesizing the information. So review the documents and use the information that's within the documents, not the introductory information, but use the content of the documents to help create your argument, back it up with evidence. And so this evidence should really just be a small clip of information, not a long direct quote. You can also paraphrase if you need to. So here is an example from the sample document. It is important that schools do not promote prayer because they are institutions for educating, not preaching. Now, you should quote some, but you should also paraphrase. Like if you have a chart of data, you can't really quote information from that source. So I would suggest you paraphrase what the chart is saying. That would be your evidence, would be what is the chart saying, and then you would analyze how that relates back to your argument, proves your claim, and supports the topic of the discussion. In the next part, this takes an important part of the document and synthesizes the information for its use in the body paragraph, which is what we just went over, which is the quote. When choosing evidence, be sure to think about what claims you will make in your essay. Okay, so if you want to go over the practice essay, good, that's fine. I will not go over it with you, but I will lead you through it. Now, you're going to write the essay. You're going to spend about 40 minutes writing your essay. It is suggested that you write 2 to 3 body paragraphs, an introduction, and a conclusion. And here are some sample essays. I suggest if you want to write some practice essays, I will go through them with you. Okay, so the first thing you should do is you should, as I said before, look at the documents, go through all the strategies that I said. Then when you get to writing the essay, first thing you should do is you should, before writing on the page, you should write somewhere on blank space, write your thesis. Okay, this thesis should follow, there's no coherent thesis structure that you necessarily need to follow, and there's no strict body paragraph. strict body paragraph layout. However, you should follow a certain understanding of it, and so that it flows in the most appropriate and effective manner. So I think first thing you should do is you should write your thesis separate from the actual page that you'll be writing your answer on. After you figure out how your thesis is going to be worded, and remember that your thesis has to be arguable, it has to be broad, it can't be too specific, but it also can't be too broad. Alright, so keep that in mind, because that's how most AP essays are written. And then the next thing is you should also make sure to have your prongs. And so your prongs should actually be talking about the different reasons for why it's the document support. So if you find information such as how in ours, right, in the evidence that we pulled from the document, we said that it was important that schools do not promote prayer because they are institutions for educating, not preaching. You could say that for your prong, this evidence would support the claim, which is just one of your prongs. You should have one claim for each of your prongs, meaning that you should have a body paragraph for each of your prong, unless you want to do a double chunked paragraph, which would mean that you want to do two claims. You want to do either two claims per paragraph or something. I don't know. I would suggest splitting it up into each prong gets its own body paragraph, and you can have multiple pieces of evidence for each paragraph if you so desire. You could also do a counterclaim if you want, but let's get into that a little bit later. Okay, so as I was saying, the claim for this one, which is also the prong, would be something related to how schools are meant to be secular and separate from religious activities and then you would say specifically in your claim, because it isolates people. Now you wouldn't say that in your actual thesis, because that is the specific arguable part for the prong that you will talk about in your claim. You don't want to restate the entire prong in your claim, and you don't want your thesis to be too specific. So your claim for this prong would be something along the lines of teaching religion in schools is not beneficial because they're institutions, or because they are secular and should be separate from religion, because it isolates people who do not practice that particular religion, and it alienates those who do not wish to believe in that a particular religion. And then you would back it up with this evidence. Okay, and then you would put your evidence, then you would do your analysis, and I would suggest watching other essay videos that I've gone over on how to do analysis, or just watch the rhetorical analysis essay, because I go over a lot about analysis in that. Now, the strongest part of your synthesis essay should be argument. Just like with the argument essay, your argument should be the main focus of your essay. Now, if your analysis is weak, make up for it with strong evidence. But your analysis also has to be strong enough to support your claims and also relate back to the prompt. So make sure your analysis relates back to the prompt, explains the significance of the evidence and how that relates back to the prompt, as well as why it matters and how this proves the argument to be true, or why it does not prove the argument to be true, or whatever your thesis or claim so happens to be. And that's it for synthesis essays, and the next video over AP Lang essays will be discussing rhetorical analysis.